MS Now senior national security reporter David Rode is still with us. Also joining us, a former U.S. State Department appointee during Trump's first term, now an MS Now political analyst, Matt Bartlett, and co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. She's also a contributor to the Notice Perspectives column. Our thanks to all of you for being with us. David, I'll turn to you again. We just watched the Pentagon briefing. I mean, there was far less news this time around than some of the others, which I guess stands to reason because we've been in a ceasefire for a week or so now. But the blockade is really important. There's sort of a lot riding on this pressure campaign from the U.S., believing that it can sort of squeeze Iran into submission and potentially open up the door to negotiations. But there's still major things to get through: the fate of its nuclear program, as well as that Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, and I just want a couple more fact checks on what Secretary Heggs has said during the press conference and in those clips. The blockade that the U.S. is carrying out is a unilateral blockade. This would be the equivalent of China blockading Taiwan on its own. Under international law, you can go to the UN Security Council. People make fun of that, or try to go to the UN Security Council and get authorization to do this because it's an international waterway. So what the U.S. is doing is actually an act of war against Iran.
Few weeks ago. Matthew, let's go to you now in terms of what you heard from that briefing, what struck you, but also just the politics of this. Yes, first to David's point, even European countries with conservative leaders, in those countries, Trump is wildly unpopular, so therefore pretty hard to put together a coalition of the willing, and Trump didn't consult them at the start of the conflict anyway. But here at home, this is still also a conflict that is not popular. Americans see rising prices, and they're being told, even from a White House that loves to spin, they're being told that prices, gas prices included, are going to stay high for months.
Yeah, Jonathan, hey, listen, great to join. As you said, I was a Trump appointee at the State Department in the first administration. And then what did we just see now? Just a classic, yet again, performance act by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, who, in the middle of a war with Iran, with legitimate questions, he once again goes back to a hysterical media critic, talking about how he's sitting at church where there are men and women in harm's way, trying to find a solution to this war, not just militarily, but diplomatically, economically, and he's thinking about how much he just hates the media. I don't know what to say other than grow up. Get a grip. It is just shocking. Again, I served in the administration. There are plenty of times as a Republican where we have found issues with media coverage. But in a war, to think that the American public, again, President Trump himself conditioned the Republican Party to be an anti-war party for the better part of 10 years. And now, again, to have very legitimate questions. And our Secretary of War just shows an inferiority complex and has a nervous breakdown, especially when you compare it to General Kane, who I think gave some information, as David said, regarding this new approach to the blockade. It may work. We don't know whether Iran is, again, perceived strength, internally weak. But again, the secretary, yet again, continues to come out there and just do this act. And I don't think he knows just how small he looks.
Yeah, media criticism, including calling journalists Pharisees. So, Lauren, let's talk about the other party to this, which is Israel. There has been real debate about whether Israel and the U.S.'s war aims are aligned, although Netanyahu seemingly has eased up the throttle a little bit at Trump's behest. We also have the conflict in Lebanon, where there were some historic meetings this week, but it's not quite clear where that goes going forward. But this is a big part of it that's easy to sort of get lost as we are thinking about taking such a Trump-centric view of this conflict.
Right. And I think it's very painful in many ways for American Jews to watch this because, Netanyahu is enormously unpopular among the Jewish diaspora around the world, even those who support Israel. And I think Secretary Clinton really got it perfectly on the show the other day in talking about this line between wanting to support Israel and recognizing that Netanyahu continues to overstep. He has outstayed his welcome in Israel, but that he has for a decade tried to get American administrations involved in a prolonged Iranian attack. You could support, I think many people did support the attacks this summer that were very narrow and had a specific objective. But this open-ended engagement is just, it's terrible for Israel, it's terrible for the United States, and it continues to erode the standing of both nations in the world. And, the fact that Netanyahu continues to attack Lebanon, they will always justify those attacks with going after terrorists, but we know they're also hitting civilians. It's just so terrible for Israel's kind of moral authority in the world on these issues. And it's been terrible for the United States. We should have said no.
So, David, there will be some pressure that builds on President Trump to resume the military conflict here, particularly if negotiations, let's say next week, don't lead to any sort of breakthrough. We already have seen some potential pressure from Netanyahu. We have heard some potential pressure from Riyadh saying, look, you need to go back in there, finish the job. There are also a few, not right-wing media voices here in the United States who have pointed out there's been satellite imagery that suggests that during the ceasefire, Iran is recovering some of its missile capabilities, some of its defensive batteries and offensive weapons that had been buried. So that is something that is acknowledgement that Iran could still pose a threat. And some might say, well, look, now's not the time yet for diplomacy.
So the problem is if it's just more airstrikes, that didn't work. I mean, the U.S. hit them with everything, and the Israelis with largely everything that we had, and it didn't destroy them. Hegseth himself said they have no command and control, but then he was simultaneously pointing out they're digging out their missiles. And that shows that they do have command and control. And the latest U.S. intelligence assessment is that we've destroyed a third of their missiles and drones. A third of them are buried. That's what they're digging up. And a third still exists. So there could be more and more of these. And the real issue, the biggest leverage Iran has, is that it hasn't attacked the energy facilities that exist across the Persian Gulf, the refineries, the natural gas processing facilities, and pipelines. They've hit a few of them, but that's their sort of, their top option. Their biggest threat is that if the U.S. bombs again and bombs their infrastructure, their power plants, they will take out all those facilities, and it will take months to rebuild them. So this goes from a energy crisis that lasts for a few weeks to months and months. So that's the problem. They still have that capability. Hegseth, in a way, was acknowledging that himself by saying they're digging them up.
I reported a couple weeks ago, Trump himself actively considering still potential ground assault. Now, many of his top aides don't want that. A lot of Republicans with political considerations don't want that. And certainly that's not going to happen now during a ceasefire. But the Pentagon has those plans ready to go, and assets are in place if needed.
They are, but we're still only talking about, it's not clear, 10,000 Marines, roughly. There's U.S. Special Forces. There's some thousands of troops from the U.S. Airborne. That's not enough for a ground invasion. When we invaded Iraq, we had 150,000 ground troops there. And what this is back to this basic premise that just American air power is enough to topple a government. That has never happened in modern warfare. And so it's sort of a war on the cheap. We're just going to do it from the air. We're going to do it ourselves with a certain number of ships. We don't have enough ships to totally reopen the Strait of Hormuz. We don't have enough ground troops to really threaten that we're going to topple the regime. I'm not saying we want a ground invasion, but that's what we did in the past, and then we botched the post-war effort.
And even if it is a smaller sort of special forces operation, still very risky to the troops involved. MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde. David, thank you as always. Really appreciate it. Coming